Okay, who has questions? Yeah.
When you're in full draw and you want to make sure there is no contact, how do you make sure you keep your anchor points consistent? On my bow, my nose touches my string just barely.
Perfect.
But
Yep.
wouldn't that be face contact? Or is that not?
If it's barely touching, right, and you're not creating like any deflection in the string, it's fine. So you can touch, but you can't change it, right? The nose is really easy to govern because you got the little micro hairs on your nose. It's very sensitive, right? So you can touch your nose without getting into trouble. But this bit over here, right, when you draw back and touch your face, most people want to turn their face toward the string. You'll see them go and anchor first and then look through the peep. All that's all over the string, right? So here's how you fix it. Pull the bow back, get everything kind of in position, look through the peep first and get your head position set because the peep runs the show, right? Then touch your face, keeping your peep in view and you can see the target. That way you can manage all of this. You might have to move your peep around a little bit to find the right spot that fits your face and the angle of your head or something like that. You might have to move it around and try to find the thing. So a good rule of thumb, if your hold is loose and wide because your peep is too high, right? Or if your hold is really hard and sharp, your peep is low because you're like this. So set it just a hair on the high side so it feels like a tiny bit of a reach, and then slowly tick it down until you find that sweet spot where it's nice and still and you can easily put the glass on, look through the peep, and then touch your anchor without getting a whole bunch of face contact. Okay? Who else? Greatest presenter in the world. Nobody ever has questions. There he is right there.
So the point where you check to see where you want to put the rest.
Yep.
What if you don't have any more air? Like you haven't cut it.
You can move the rest back.
And what if you have a point that doesn't allow you to, even with an overdraw?
You can. And I have a Hoyt, right? And I use a Hamsky rest, and I put the rest on the back side of the bridge. Yeah.
But on the hunting ones,
I haven't done that with the hunting bow. So I'm talking more target with that, you know. So there are still rests that you can get back at the hunting bow, but they're not hunting rests, right? So the only way that you could do it would be adding overhang, but if you're already shooting all of the arrow, make sure that your rest tension is just right. Right? Who else? Yep. Here, pass that over this way.
What programs do they still use today in terms of inspire and putting on the information on the gun lengths and so forth? You still use Archer's Advantage?
I still use Archer's Advantage. That's one of the more accurate arrow selection wares that's still in use. That I'll do something really simple. I'll just go in without setting up everything. I'll just set up, I have this brand bow with this cam and this limb and it's this draw length. And they have all of the bows in the system already. So I select that bow, put it in the system, and then move over to the shaft selector, and it has that little gradient, right? So that it's optimal spine and it's stiff or it's weak. And I do that to, especially if I'm setting up arrows for small people with light poundages and short draw lengths, or I know that I'm gonna shoot a 23-15, which is definitely too stiff for my bow. So how long do I have to make this arrow before the spine becomes correct to shoot out of my setup? So I can do that. I can model the arrow by making it longer, add a little more point weight, longer, until I get that in the sweet spot, and it at least gets me to a really good starting spot. And typically, it's very rare that I'll have something that is outside of the recommendations that I get from Archer's Advantage. It's very rare.
And once you've done that, do you look for a node in the
Yes, you know, and if I'm doing outdoor, you know, there's something I didn't say. Outdoor target arrows, the lighter the arrow is, the more important that step is. This arrow with a 200 grain point in it and the whole package weighs 700 grains, it doesn't matter at all because it just plows through whatever you got in there, right? But a 300 grain X10 with little bitty vanes and a 120 grain point, you can dramatically see the difference between the two. So with the lighter weight carbon arrows, 3D arrows that are fat but light spined and very light, those are the ones you really need to pay attention to. So you're doing the arrow length so you can figure out how much extension can you get on the rest within reason without shooting a crazy 1985 overdraw, right? You can just have enough of a backward setting on your rest. How much do you need to add, right? So you know, so if I know that this arrow has to be 31 inches, right? I can slide the point in there and figure out by bouncing the arrow, right? This doesn't even have a point, but it'll still have a node. It'll just be right there. So it's just farther away. The heavier the point is, the closer it is, the lighter it is, the farther away it is, right? It's kind of the rule of thumb. So I will figure out what the distance is. If that's 2 inches, then I can cut the arrow to the length that I want it to be and slide my arrow rest to make sure that I have 2 inches of overhang. Or I can figure out where the arrow, I'll draw this arrow back on my bow and mark it where the arrow touches the rest, add 2 inches, and then cut it. So he's out of arrow length for his, so he would have to move the rest. But if you're not out of arrow length, you can just add a little overhang, right? But the node will be the same even if you cut the arrow. Right? It'll be the same distance, within reason. If you cut it this long, it'll get weird, but within reason, it'll be the same. All right, who else?
How important do you think the difference in run out?
So run out, the difference between tolerance and two cylinder components, like knock and the arrow.
It's a big deal. So
You know, you talk about bent knocks.
yes.
Can you, I guess, how do you diagnose bent knock? Obviously, you need to replace it, but let's say you don't realize that it's not squared up. Obviously, you want to square it. What's the best way to discover whether you're dealing with bent knock or not?
So you can go through that process of elimination, right? Because if you have too many components stacked up and you end up with several tolerances that are a tiny bit out that equal a lot, right? Or even if you have a very long knock section that's flexible, right? That can behave like a bent knock as well. If the way your bow is pushing, it causes the knock in to be flexible, right? But it's a process of elimination. The first thing I'll do when I'm checking my knock straightness is if it looks crooked, I'll take the knock, twist it around, round, a couple times, spin it again. If it's still bent, I'll pull it out, get a new one, put it in, spin it, and if it's still not straight, then I pull the bushing out and start checking this to see what's going on here. Typically, this stuff, these bushings, they go in these arrows so well that this particular component is really straight, and I rarely get one that's really bad, right? Most of the time, it's a knot that's been shot a bunch, or I might have hit it, but it doesn't show signs of being hit. But a brand new knock out of the bag with a brand new arrow that was straight to start with, when you put those two together, in almost every case, they are super straight and you can spin them and they turn out to be. But if not, you just go by a process of elimination. Go to the most obvious and then start stepping down until you end up, well, I guess this is a bad arrow, and then get another one, right?
Have you ever squared up knock ends right from the factory, brand new arrows, squared them up just in case?
I have, but I haven't found it to help me that much because I've checked like the back ends of X10s. There's a few arrow brands out there that are the solid carbon shafts where they're like, well, you know, there may be a straight section or a section there, and you cut a little off this end, a little off that end, and you end up with the straightest portion of the arrow. But for X10s and ACEs and a lot of those arrows that are specifically matched and selected in bundles with a lot number and all that, those are pretty dang straight from the factory. But if I have to cut from the back for some reason or another, I'll be extra careful. However, the components are long enough that go into the arrow because it uses the tube. It's not sitting on the outside, it's sitting inside. That the part sitting into the tube helps it be straight even if the cut isn't. So this part, to flatten that out, will make that sufficient. So then when you slide that much of a pin knock in there, it's going to be straight, at least concentric with the shaft itself. Who else? Yep.
Spine index.
Okay, so this may or may not be super popular, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Y'all ready to turn your phones off? Nobody can put this on YouTube. Okay, no. I don't believe in spine index, and this is why. Where it came from was wooden arrows. When you mill wooden squares into round shafts, there's grain that goes horizontally through the arrow. And if you shoot the arrow with the grain vertical, it behaves weaker than you shoot the arrow with the grain horizontal. So if you spined that arrow 360 degrees, it would draw a peanut when you mapped it on a graph, right? If you have a tube, a precision tube made of carbon or aluminum, that the wall thickness is exact all the way around, the hole in the shaft is concentric with the outside diameter of the shaft. If it has a stiff spot in it, you have a bad arrow, right? Because it's a tube, okay? So I see a lot of arrows that do have that spine match indicator, and unless they have someone spine checking, you know, every arrow and then hand making a mark, I don't believe that's going to be accurate, because the way they make these arrows and they put this on, it's a pad printer, and there's a big giant hopper full of arrows, and they run down this little ramp, you know, one by one, and they run under this pad printer that's rolling, and it puts this on there, right? It also would put that little line on there too, because that's part of the thing. So what kind of magic they use to make that pad printer hit that stiff side of the shaft, I don't know, but that's some serious technology there, if that's like accurate, you see? So if you take one of these arrows, or an X10, a Pro Tour, an ACE, gold tip, whatever, brand, you know, aware, right? Any arrow, and you put this in a really good spine tester. I'm not talking about the bare spine tester that you can buy for consumers. I'm talking about a really good one. If you plotted this arrow on a graph, it would make a fuzzy circle. You probably could find a stiff side of this shaft that's, you know, 0.005 stiffer than another part of the shaft, but it won't make a hill of beans difference in your accuracy. We just can't shoot that good, and the distances aren't that great, right? So you don't have to worry about that. And you can't float them to find the stiff side for sure. If you hear that, put corks in the ends. You're finding the most buoyant side of the cork when you do that, right? Yeah. Who else? So I don't know everything I should know about the construction of carbon arrows, but most of them are wound, and there isn't a seam in there. These arrows here, they are folded, you know, into a circle, but it's not a circle this big. It's a circle this big with a wall thickness of that, right? And then they draw it down, 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 down until they get the wall thickness and size that it comes to, so that technically there was a seam present here at one time, but it's been drawn out so much that it's just not there anymore, right? Carbon arrows made that way, I'm not sure. I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah. I would think that a pultruded shaft, you know, however that's manufactured and how they draw that through a die, it could make a mark on it, but I don't know. I can't speak to that accurately. Who else? Is that it? Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming out. Leon, did I forget anything? Did I forget an amazing feature of this amazing saw? And if you order within the next 25 minutes. No. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you.